Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Convocation Unscripted, a podcast at the intersection of religion, culture, and politics. I am one of your hosts, Jemar Tisby, and I am joined by Diana Butler Bass, Kristin Du Mez, and Robbie Jones. Hi, everybody.
Hey there.
Hey,
Hey,
Jamar.
Jamar.
We are each scholars, three historians, and we let in one sociologist who write about religion and its intersection with culture, history, and politics in America. And so the way it works, somebody introduces a topic. We don't all know what it's going to be exactly, but we give you our authentic, honest response in the moment. That's why it's called the Convocation Unscripted. And this live episode of the Convocation Unscripted is now in session. Thank y'all for tuning in for our last live Convocation Unscripted before the new year. And so I think we're all still reeling, we're all still processing, and also in the midst of planning for the holidays. I see some holiday decorations going on in some of your homes and backgrounds. Is anyone doing anything fun or something they're looking forward to over the holidays?
Oh, that's an interesting question. It's been hard yet into the spirit of things. And so it's only this week since I got my book manuscript in that I've been able to decorate and have some fun. And
You
it's
can't just let that go, the book manuscript. Can you say anything about that, or it's under wraps, just something to look forward to?
it's a book called A Beautiful Year, and it's basically drawn out of my Substack. I take people around the Christian calendar and look at it as alternative time. And I think that that's a really interesting way to set up next year in particular, because the way the book starts is really kind of funny. I started with how often do you think about the Roman Empire? And of course, the answer is men think about it more than women do. But I got news. I think about it every day, because every time I look at the calendar, I'm reminded of imperialism and the politics of 2000 years ago. So that's what it's set up as, thinking about time and a calendar as an alternative structure to the organization and values of our lives. And so that's the book. And that doesn't take anything away. It's full of surprises. It's 52 essays taking people through the entire year. And it will come out on, I think it's November 11th next year, maybe November 18th, right before Advent begins at the beginning of December 2025. So that's my project. So that's what I've been working on, besides trying to keep the orange Grinch from stealing my Christmas.
Dan, I want to know, is it going to have like one of those little ribbon things that are attached to the book so you can kind of mark your place as you go?
Yeah, I was part of the deal with
Awesome.
It's got decal edges and this beautiful cover and ribbons.
So you're taking back the devotional style.
Yeah. And it's so funny because everybody, all my friends, including you all, are writing books about Christian nationalism and really scary things. And I'm writing about Jesus.
That's a good thing. We need to be reminded.
Peace on earth and all that sort of stuff.
Kristin, are you staying put for the holidays? Are the kids cooking again?
No. We always head out to Iowa for Christmas. So we are getting on the road on Saturday and the 11-hour trek, all in a minivan. So lots of fun times ahead. But no, we always go to Iowa, have a really great time with family, the cousins, and, lots of eating and cooking and just really hanging out. So we're looking forward to that time together. I sadly have not turned in a book manuscript, but I am back into Live, Laugh, Love. It's been a while, having set it aside for the most part, for the last couple months at least. And so that's been fun. And I'm always fighting against myself, trying to cut words and then end up just adding more. So, but hope to finish that in the next few months.
Yeah. What's your timeline on that, Kristen? Do you have one? I know it's the worst thing to
You
ever
and
ask an
my
author,
editor and my
right?
agent all would like to know. No, we've been chatting on that. I hope to turn in the manuscript by the end of summer. So
Right.
it should be out the following summer.
We're all talking manuscripts. I'm in the final days, although not really final phase of writing. You just have to finish it for a manuscript I'm working on, which is tentatively called Notes from an Evangelical Reject. And it's a memoir of my time in and out of evangelicalism, as we can all attest to. But I name names and I point fingers and I tell my truth. So it's really been kind of fun slash bittersweet to go down memory road and to look at old emails, essays, articles, meeting agendas, all of that stuff from particularly this era from 2014 to 2017. Oh my goodness. It was, I'll call it a reckoning, not in the sense that everything changed, but it definitely shifted the conversation. We had Black Lives Matter, conversations about racial justice, the first Trump presidency and election, and all of that. And wow, we went through some things not only as a nation, but a church. As far as holidays, I am just looking forward to some Kansas City barbecue with when we visit in-laws, and we always go to Jack Stack, and it's something I look forward to every year. And it is appropriate. Let's finish with you, Robbie, holiday plans, and then kick us off because PRRI has some really cool, new, interesting data.
Yeah. First, I just want to say, Jamar, you just had a book out. How is it you got another one coming out?
Yeah, well,
Thank
this
you.
one,
Thank
it's
you.
just another manuscript. And then actually, I do have two new books coming out. It's in my background. Check it out. I got to do show and tell here. All right. So,
Oh my
Spirit of Justice is the young readers version. This is for middle
Awesome.
schoolers, kids 8 to 12. I am so thrilled. It's my first book with pencil illustrations by an artist in there, and every section is just a little bio of the person, and you
Nice.
can read one or two at night or whenever. You can talk about them with your kids. Then, first picture book, I
Oh,
Am
I
the
love
Spirit of
that.
Justice. Gorgeous prints, and you can see the prints back here on the wall. The artist Nadia Fisher sent them to me, and so we have them on display on the wall. So those come out January 7th. They're available for pre-order wherever books are sold. And then Spirit of Justice just came out in September, working on the next manuscript. Always be writing. That's my motto, ABW.
Well, clearly that's happening. All right. Well, I am going south and more south for the break. We're heading to Mississippi to see my folks and extended family there on my side, and then we're going to slide even further south into the ocean to go to Jamaica for New Year's with my wife's family. So we will see cousins and cousins and more cousins in two different places. But it's going to be 20 degrees here in DC when we leave. So packing is going to be kind of weird. Headed, down into the warmer climes, but like going to freeze on this end before we leave. So that's kind of what we're up to. Oh, and I am
You leave and I stay in DC because it's so quiet.
it's true. Yeah. We did that for Thanksgiving though, so I'm paying the price now for sitting home for Thanksgiving. Well, I will say, I got a new proposal that I'm also working on just because I can't be outdone by the rest of you here, but it should be quietly out the door, for a kind of first look. I will say more about what it is later, but it is kind of out the door, at least to the kind of first eyes. And I'll come back to topic later. So should I jump into some data? So rare I get here with the three historians and I get to lead off. But I put the link here to my latest Substack where I summarize the data, and then you can link through to the full report if you really want to go down the rabbit hole. But we were in the field right after the election. So we decided to go like literally the day after the election, starting to collect data on so what happened, what were people thinking? As many of you on this call probably know, trying to figure out where religious groups were in the exit polls is always dicey because they never quite put it out in a digestible form. It's really hard to decipher all the religious groups. So this is kind of our first good look at kind of where the typical religious groups that we sociologists look at. So this is a very large survey. It was 4,700 voters, 5,300 people altogether. So we have a pretty good look at things. I don't usually do this. I am going to pull it up though real quick here. I'm going to share my screen for those of you who are here so you can see it real quickly. And I'm just going to point because I think it'll be easier if I can just point to a couple of things. So here is, can you all see that?
Yeah.
All right. So here is our basic look at the election. And, the thing is not much moved. That's the story here. I won't go into it a lot, but, again, 85% of white evangelicals, super majorities of white Catholics, white non-evangelical Protestants, white Christians overall. They're the only group that's not a white Christian group are Latino Protestants that also tend to be charismatic, evangelical, supporting Trump. All the other groups on the other side. And once again, there are no two groups that are further apart than white evangelical Protestants and black Protestants. Here, they are literally mirror images of one another here. So, kind of take that in for a minute. I think we kind of move past that number pretty quickly because it's something we're used to seeing. But, it's really quite something that there's more distance, for example, between white evangelicals and African-American Protestants than there are between white evangelicals and Jews, or white evangelicals and Muslims, or white evangelicals and unaffiliated people. Like those are the two groups the furthest apart. And I keep saying, so I grew up in that world, Southern Baptist, right? But, on this topic, we got so many things wrong as, we were on the wrong side of slavery, on the wrong side of Jim Crow, on the wrong side of civil rights. And I just keep thinking like, you know what, if we get that many things wrong for, a few centuries, maybe we ought to take a century or two to kind of pause if we see ourselves that far on the wrong side or on the other side of an issue of our black brothers and sisters in Christ. It just maybe ought to mean something to a little check, maybe, but not so much in the real world. But I think it'd be a good idea. The other thing I do want to point out is I just took some time to kind of unpack these two, what I call zombie myths about white evangelicals, because they just will not die, even though there's like no evidence holding them up. And that is one, this idea that white evangelicals were somehow reluctant Trump voters, that they like held their noses and voted for Trump. And two, that Trump's strongest supporters inside of the white evangelical group were not churchgoers, were people who were Christians in name only. Like there is no evidence for either one of those theories, even though they just continue to kind of bump around in the kind of digital space and even in print sometimes. But just a kind of couple of checks here. Trump's favorability among white evangelical voters in this last election cycle. This is just, do you like him or not, right? Straight up, like do you have a favorable view of him or not? Not compared to Kamala, just him. 73% favorable view of Trump in the last election cycle. And even among other groups that support Trump, it's 20 points higher than the white non-evangelical Protestants and white Catholics here, just really in a league of their own. And I think probably the more disturbing one is that 2/3 of white evangelicals, again, not only love Trump, but like really are on board with even the cruelest and most racist things that he has said. So this idea that immigrants are poisoning the blood of the country, 2/3 of white evangelicals on board, right, with that statement from Trump, which once again is Nazi sentiments, right? Not just racist, but right directly out of Mein Kampf, this idea of poisoning the blood of the country. The other thing to say is that, okay, well, it is not the case that white evangelicals who go to church are less supportive of Trump. It is, in fact, the opposite is true. Here's the little chart with the receipts. Here, it's true for both white evangelicals and white Catholics that the more you go to church, the more likely you are to support Trump. Interestingly enough, this one's for Diana. Among the white non-evangelicals, the main line, it's actually the opposite. True here, that you are slightly less likely to support Trump if you go to church more frequently. That is also the case. I don't have it on this chart. I've seen it. I've done it in other charts, but it's also the case for African-American Christians, that the more you go to church, the less likely you are to support Trump. So, but among white evangelicals and white Catholics, it is like the opposite thing. In fact, white evangelicals who go to church weekly or more are actually 11 percentage points more likely to support Trump than those who seldom or never attend. And I'll just throw this one out for fun. We can come back to this one, but we did ask about whether people were, we just talked about holiday plans, whether people were altering their plans for the holidays or not. It turns out only about 1 in 10 American voters say that they are going to alter their plans to spend less time with certain family members because of political views. But it turns out that Democrats are 5 times as likely as Republicans to say that. So for some obvious reasons. So I will drop it off there and see where else we want to go. But the full links to this this is on my, I put the link to my Substack here. It's got the summary, and then you can click through to take a deep dive down the rabbit hole if you want on PRRI's website, or it's at prri.org.
Well, that is vaguely a Christmas present to my friends about church-going mainliners.
Yeah. Now, they still majority supported Trump, so I don't want to oversell it here. Even the churchgoers did, but less so.
Yes, I saw that it was still Trumpy, but not as Trumpy as the total vote. And that does make sense because so many people are likely to say that they're still a Lutheran or still a Methodist or still an Episcopalian when they never go to church. It's a little bit more like Catholic identity in that way. So, but the ones who are showing up at church, that means that they're at least 50-50 sort of, maybe almost, hearing messages that correct the idea of immigrants poisoning the blood and some other things. So that is, I'm going to hold that one up as a small win and keep encouraging my mainline clergy friends and theologians that that's a place to press in, because apparently you're having some impact. So good for you. Thank you very much for your hard work on that score.
I was gonna go last because I want to rant.
Oh.
But I'll...
I'm sorry. I knew you had things to say, so I was deferring to you, Jemar. I'll just say something very, very, very quickly then, because I don't want to step on your rant. So I was interested in something you didn't present here, Robbie, but that came up in the webinar that PRRI did last week on when you released this data. And that was the issue of gender. And I thought Melissa Deckman, PRI's Melissa Deckman, did a really nice job just kind of presenting that and also pushing back some frequent misconceptions when we think about gender and the electorate. And that in this election, as in others, gender matters less than perceptions of gender, right? And so what you think men and women ought to be is a much stronger predictor of how you're going to vote than if you are a man or a woman. And we certainly saw that in this case. And of course, that very interesting survey question of whether or not you think that America has become too soft and feminine. Those who think that is the case are a very strong predictor for voting for Trump. And so we know this. We know that gender is complicated. We know that gender is salient, even when in ways that don't simply equate to women vote for the woman or for the Democrat. Right. And yet every single election, it seems like we have to rediscover this complexity, and the media has to as well. So just a shout out to that issue, and to the Zoom that you all did last week at PRI, which I think is available online. That gets into that in a little bit more detail. I really appreciated that.
Yeah, and the link to that is in that same Substack link that I put in the chat.
Can I ask a clarification question there just really quickly? Was that question cross-tabbed with the religious group? Because 40% of mainline clergy right now are female. And so it would be really interesting to see what the white non-evangelical answer is there, knowing that the percentage of women clergy is so incredibly high in and around the main line. And that could be actually a difference with that people attending church and people who don't attend church figure.
Yeah, it's still well, ask and you shall receive. It's still 55% who agree that this idea that society as a whole become too soft and feminine among white mainliners, but it's 64% among white evangelicals, right? So it's a good 11 percentage points down, but it still leans that direction among the white mainline.
Okay, just a
Yeah.
question I thought was worth asking.
Yep.
Well, I always love the synergy between history and sociology, and the work that social scientists do uh, gives sort of contemporary ballast to a lot of the historical observations. But I'm not even focusing so much on history here. A few things jumped out at me from the data, and thank you, Robbie, and the team at PRRI for a great webinar unpacking it. One was the holiday plans. That's really interesting to me. The discrepancy, right? Only 5% of Republicans said they would spend significantly less time with people because of their political affiliation, however the question was framed. 23% of Democrats. And I just think that's really interesting. So the folks whose candidate won the election have no problem, hanging out at the dinner table, maybe even talking about this. I don't know. But the people who like are on this call and wanted democracy to win writ large, regardless of what they think about the Democratic Party, we're a lot more apprehensive about these conversations over the holiday and spending time with people. I just spoke to a good friend who is a single Black woman. One of her litmus tests is, who did you vote for? And she is only interested in dating Black men. And she encountered 4 different Black men in a month who had voted Republican in the presidential election, which is mind blowing. I'll get to that in a second. But the idea that while it may not be a majority of people who plan to sort of change their plans with family, when you break it down by party, it's nearly a quarter of the Democratic respondents, which I thought was interesting. The other aspect, I'll get to this, but based on that webinar y'all did, Robbie, I came away with 3 observations. And for those listening, this is truly unscripted because y'all might disagree vehemently or just have a different take. The first observation, 1, white Christians must be a major focus. I know none of y'all will disagree with that, but it just keeps like it has been reiterated again and again and again and again and again from 2016 to 2020 to 2024. Those are just the presidential elections. And there's been a flood of literature out there, not just books, articles and research and all of this stuff demonstrating. And then the data backs this up. Here's what I keep saying. It's not even just that white Christians are more prone to white Christian nationalism or supporting the Republican Party. It's that white Christian churches are vectors for this teaching.
Yep.
They are super spreaders of it. It is being promulgated from the pulpits, Bible study materials, Sunday schools, which I think correlates with the more you go to church, the more prone you are to believe this stuff. Why? Because that's one of the places where you're getting it, among the many, online and podcasts and things of that nature. Second observation. This comes from one of the panelists, and he was talking in particular about Black male voters and how some, although it's overblown, some had voted more Republican, but I think it applies to everyone. Misogyny and misogynoir. This is to Kristin's point. Even the perception about gender, right? Like that is a problem, and this is a challenge to the men because we got to collect the men. What the heck is going on? That this is their idea of manhood. Trump? Trump? Seriously? Even if you had a classic backwards view of a man, a New York liberal for most of his life is your picture. Oh, my beef, I've mentioned this before. Pete Hegseth, pretty boy. That's your man? Come on. He uses so much gel, he better not be near a flame. Now listen, we gotta get the dudes. And I'm sick of this. I'm sick of it. That is not what manhood is. What about Jesus? Hmm? Even David, all his flaws, he was a musician. He was a poet. Come on. This is dumb. I'm mad at the men. And then two, the third observation, political ignorance,
Right.
fueled by disinformation and misinformation, but also just a lack of attention and care. Listen, yes, there's disinformation and misinformation, but you know what? It ain't that hard. It ain't that hard to check a source. I am sick of it. We cannot lower the bar for voters. We live in an information age, which is a double-edged sword. One, you get a lot of disinformation and misinformation. Two, you also have access to tons of other data to check this. It wouldn't take, I'll give you one example. I put this on my Instagram weeks ago. I was in an airport on a layover it was in Denver in the United Airport Lounge. And I had gotten a pass from a friend, very thoughtful gift to give 1 day pass to this United Club. And I was sitting next to a guy who, white male, just since we're talking demographics, he had soundproof headphones on, was doing a Zoom call. So he was talking very loudly. Once they got done with business, they started talking about politics. This is right before the election. He starts talking about a picture and an article that had gone out on right-wing news about like ballot tampering in Montana, where he was from. And it turns out, and he was basically saying, see, this is what's going on. We got to protect your elections. We got that thing shut down and we spread the word. I literally, while he was talking, did a Google search, found the original right-wing article, which is as off as it could be, found the fact check article, which said that it was this Democratic staffer who was checking to make sure like a ballot collection box was screwed into the wall and couldn't be tampered with. But some security camera had seen this person doing that and inflated it. Now that Democratic staffer was fired just for touching it, just because that office didn't want even the hint of tampering. But this man, who was clearly wealthy, clearly intelligent, had fallen for it. What excuse is there? It only, for him, he just wanted to believe it. He had the resources to check, but he just wanted to believe it. But for so many people, they just don't pay attention enough. Every 4 years is not enough. And churches and faith communities, we need to constantly press our congregations and communities, pay attention. And my last point is this: stop being scared to talk about politics in the church, because politics is not the same as partisanship. Politics is not the same as partisanship. You don't have to endorse a particular political party in order to talk about politics in church. That is one of the tactics that the far right has used against racial justice. Well, you're bringing politics into the church. No, we're not. We're bringing the image of God into church. And we're actually taking the image of God to the streets and saying how this should affect policy. So don't cede that ground to people. And if you are with pastors, church leaders who are hesitant, who are tiptoeing, tell them from me, this is a time of moral clarity, and you need to be clear about what you stand for and what you don't. Y'all, this is game on. He's
Jemar,
already
just
won again.
reminds me real quick about, one of the most vocal early folks saying we need to keep politics out of church was Jerry Falwell.
Yeah.
Right? And who did he have in mind when he made that comment?
Those
Martin Luther
pesky
King
civil
Jr.
rights activists.
Yep.
Yep. And the
Wait.
pesky, right, Christian civil rights activists who, were pressing that moral claim. Jemar, thank you for that. And I just wanted to echo your words and respond to Terry's question in the chat about, if you're in a white mainline church, or let's just say white evangelical church, or wherever you find yourself, the question was like, what should we do? Should we say something? Should we leave? I'm like, absolutely 100% say something. Say something, because what we're already seeing on a national level, when we're looking at very powerful media organizations, right? You saw that with ABC, MSNBC, CNN, LA Times, Washington Post. You already see bending the knee, right? There's too much to risk. meaning money. It's just money, right? What about the mission? What about the mission of the news organizations, right? What about the mission of our churches? But there's always this perception of risk. So we, each and every one of us, has to normalize speaking truth. And, if it's in your organization, in your family, in your church, just keep speaking truth. And don't have, somebody else mentioned a great Christmas gift, Timothy Snyder's on tyranny. Absolutely do not obey in advance. Do not self muzzle in advance, right? And everybody, no matter where you're positioned, can play a role in normalizing speaking truth. And it's, and then people can borrow courage from each other.
I had just a small experience of that in church this past Sunday. I go to a fairly small service at an Episcopal church that's a Sunday evening service. And as I was going through the line after church, talking to the pastors, the senior minister asked me how I was doing. And I said, well, actually, I'm not doing very well. And I was talking about the compliance of the media and the fears among some of our colleagues about speaking out and how that was becoming a real problem. And that there were parts of my experience where I felt scared. And so we were talking about this in line, and before I knew it, there were about 15 people standing around us, and they wanted to engage the subject. And I was just sort of shocked because I kept trying to pull away, thinking that the pastor and I were having a private conversation, but a whole bunch of people in the church who were coming through the line, they wanted to hear what we were talking about. They were engaged. And so I thought, well, this is interesting because I think that the pastor, who's a wonderful young woman, she probably would have been afraid to have an adult coffee hour on that topic, but they were sort of inventing their own after church conversation. And it made me feel a little bit better. I mean, because people were hugging me and saying, don't be scared. We really value what you're saying. And they specifically mentioned all three of you and the Convocation. And they said, you all been doing great work. I hope none of you feel afraid. We're on your side. And I walked away feeling both sort of still ambiguously what the heck is going on in the world here. But on the other hand, I was thinking, wow, this is really amazing. Just here in my own neighborhood, which is a pretty liberal neighborhood, but there are people in my church who voted for Trump. Just here that kind of impromptu truth-telling conversation happened immediately following a church service, and the people wanted to hear it. They did not want it to be quiet.
Thank you for letting me rant. And yes, and amen to all that you've said. We are all of us concerned about some of the recent news around. It was the economic plan, I believe, to keep the government from shutting down, and we had a non-elected billionaire weigh in and seeming to sway what had looked like something that politically was about to happen. So let's lead off on, let's have someone lead off on talking about how oligarchy is now the American way in the current state of politics.
Yeah, I'll start by saying, this is something that's been weighing on me over the past months, and particularly since the election, because we in this space tend to be on call on the Christian nationalism beat, right? Get a lot of interview requests on that, and I duly show up and explain what I'm seeing, explain the dynamics, and it is important to understand. And we've seen the data, we've seen what voters are choosing and then expecting on the other end. We've all read Project 2025, and then and that's just one of many. But sometimes I worry that the intense interest around Project 2025, around Christian nationalism, is distracting some folks from what else is happening, right? And the mass concentration of power in the hands of Elon Musk, a very small group of extremely wealthy individuals. And you can see, we talked before about how much Musk himself donated to Trump's campaign, right? $250 million, more than that. And that's just the outright donations. Plus, thumb on the scale of X, the algorithms, and I mean, my feed is just filled with Republicans and with Musk himself all the time. I'm just, it's a completely different feed than it was a year or two ago. So there's all that going on. And then you can also see the charts of how much his personal wealth has increased, and it's in the billions since the election, right? And then you look at him
It's a
threatening.
40% increase in his personal wealth since November 5th.
And you see him, not just, pressuring around this issue of the debt limit, but also threatening to fund primary opponents for any Republicans who don't fall in line. So this is where we're looking at, the further captivity of one of our two political parties. And where does this end? And at what point are people going to say, maybe this was a bad idea? I mean, it's not happening yet. I'm not seeing it. But I'm sitting back and watching that. And it's not entirely separate from the Christian nationalist a conversation, because it's all fundamentally about power. It's anti-democratic. But when I give interviews on Christian nationalism, I always add this little caveat in terms of what might we expect to see enacted. I said it's going to depend entirely on the extent to which the Christian nationalist agenda aligns with Elon Musk's agenda. And wherever it doesn't, it's not going to happen.
I think that this issue right here goes to one of Jemar's earlier questions. And he said, in what universe is this masculinity? And the truth of it is that Elon Musk and these billionaires are kind of, and this borrows from Kristin too, the new John Waynes. Is that masculinity in the manosphere isn't the guy who gets on the horse and rides off into the sunset and shoots up all the native
Marlboro Man, or
right, the Marlboro Man. It's not John Wayne. The new masculinity is these billionaires who control public narrative, who can stick it to everybody else. And I mean, I don't know quite how to describe the hero status that Elon Musk has in the manosphere, but it's obviously huge. And when it comes to the link between Christian nationalism and the manosphere, the two people that I thought who were most on top of that before the election, stretching back months actually before the election, were Julie Ingersoll of the University of North Florida, who was stitching together those connections very early on, and Tripp Fuller, who's mostly an ethicist and process theology guy, who runs that massive podcast, Homebrewed Christianity. And he listens regularly to Rogan and pays attention to what's going on with Jordan Peterson, and has been exploring kind of the theology of masculinity that he was seeing all around in that podcasting universe space. And so I think that there are some very important cross currents there, but it is, Jemar, this is masculinity in the early 21st century. These are the male heroes of our time. Jesus, of course, has nothing to do with this, except that he puts kind of a sheen on it for some of the Christian types, and maybe the Jordan Peterson doorway towards the Elon Musks. Yeah, this is manhood.
I've said one thing. I mean,
Musk.
the other, my first reaction, I've got to admit, with the whole, Doge, like outside pseudo invented non-department department that Musk and Ramaswamy were going to be put in charge of, was to sort of scoff at it. But the more I've been thinking about it, like when you're inside something like the Senate, there are some rules, right? That you have, if you're an elected senator, there are some rules you have to follow. You have to do certain disclosures. You have to follow certain procedures. But if you are outside the system like this and something that just is declaring itself to be a department, you have no rules whatsoever. You can bop in, and the only way, I mean, you're not, you know, I'm sure we'll see him sitting in on committee meetings. We'll see him just like showing up, and unless the sergeant at arms, Congress like throws him out, you know, he'll just be, you know, at cabinet meetings and sitting by Trump's side, you know, as his kind of pseudo vice president, right? But then won't be required. It can just be all this dark stuff because there's no reporting requirements, no disclosures, none of that stuff, right? Matters. No readouts of phone calls, like all the kind of stuff we're used to in a democracy that helps us kind of get transparency. Those be zero accountability and tons of power at the same time.
I just wanted to quick add a couple more journalists who are covering this well, Diana. Jenny Cohn of Bucks County Beacon,
Right.
really,
She's
really
good.
great coverage, and she's been on this for a couple of years now. And then also there was a really good piece, if you don't actually know what we're talking about here, in Mother Jones not too long ago. It's actually a November December issue, and that's Kira Butler's. To understand JD Vance, you need to meet the Theo Bros. Some of us have had the pleasure of meeting these Theo Bros on social media in the past several years, but it's just a good overview. And so those journalists have been doing some really great work there too.
I think historically it's an interesting trajectory for the three of us because I think that it's the 21st century version of the Henry Ford. You know, and so there's always been this kind of billionaire masculinity sort of thread, which was, I think, taken over sort of more by Hollywood and the sort of individualistic and kind of violent masculinity. But this elevation of the inventor and the billionaire and oddly enough, so many of these people obviously have deep ties into different forms of white supremacy movements over the late 19th and early 20th century as well. So I think that this is an old thing sort of brought forward, and obviously, I made the comment today. I'm not quite sure that this isn't 100% true, but it's probably 99.5% true. I think that Elon Musk right now might be the richest person ever in human history.
Yeah, that's right.
And that is just remarkable. If we think that this man who's alive now could have bought every Caesar, every emperor, every king, every pope, and not one of them would come close to the percentage difference of the wealth that Elon Musk owns and the wealth that they had in their own time. And so this is the most powerful human being that has ever lived in terms of financial resources. This is not your average billionaire. This is something of an entirely different magnitude that has a trajectory of heroism in American history.
That's a chilling way to put it, but entirely true. And listen, this is how I think of it. When we think about race-based chattel slavery, most people initially think of the racial prejudice, the idea that skin color is somehow attached to your value as a human being. Obviously, that's part of it, but that's not why people went to war to preserve it. They did that because of money. And so what I often say is, you know, people like to say that slavery is America's original sin. I say it's America's original symptom, and its original sin is greed. And that stream persists to this day, to where in every era of US history, we can see how the wealthy are also powerful politically, socially, culturally, economically. And now we're sort of seeing the apotheosis of it with this beyond description wealthy individual who it's not incidental to his politics, I think, that he has a context of South Africa and apartheid. Peter Thiel as well. Lori mentioned that in the comments. So all of that. Um, just to pivot a little bit to the questions. This one to you, Kristen, just very basic. You had a really powerful panel at Notre Dame that you coordinated. Uh, Linda Kay is wondering if all of those sessions are available, particularly the third panel and the strategy session.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for asking. And that was a couple weeks ago now that we had held the election postmortem at Notre Dame. The Center for Philosophy of Religion sponsored it. Robbie made it out for that and was on the first panel. Three panels over the course of the day. Two of the three were filmed and are online now. The third one, the strategy session, we intentionally did not film that one. We wanted to have one space where scholars, participants, attendees could all just talk frankly, ask questions, and maybe even make some plans for what might be done going forward. That wasn't going to be then put online and free for the taking. Really, as it turns out, I don't think there was anything that was said in that third strategy session that um, um, people wouldn't want to get out, but we just wanted to be sure that we had a space that wasn't that allowed for frank conversation, and so that was the reason for that. I will say that Chris Crawford of Protect Democracy, one of the participants in the strategy session, did publish his talk, and so you can get a little glimpse of that. But you can find the videos of the panels, and they're all very interesting, and each presentation was kept to a very nice 10 minutes. So there's a lot in those 10-minute presentations from some of just the best thinkers on these topics. And you can find those on the website of the Center for Philosophy of Religion, and I also just sent those out in my Substack post this week, so you can access them there as well.
Yes, y'all, we do not just say subscribe just because we're online. Like, there's really valuable information. Robbie just had stuff from PRRI. Kristen has links to this new panel. Diana's always putting out incredible thinking and events. So please do subscribe to our individual Substacks as well as convocation.substack.com. Robbie, this one's for you from C. Olney. Robbie, how do you make sure people are saying how they really voted in these post-election polls? Honesty question.
Yeah, well, I think mostly what we do is we triangulate. And so a couple things. One of the biggest historical influences of people maybe not telling the truth on public opinion polls is when they're interacting with a human interviewer. And so we found even things like gender effects, or if they can pick up an accent in the human interviewer, sometimes they'll react to that accent. If it's a Southern accent and you ask about race, it might get people to answer differently, like those kinds of things. But in the modern era, we're mostly doing polling online these days. And so you take the human interviewer that gets that kind of bias thing out of it. People, obviously, this is all self-reported, so people can obviously not tell the truth. But then we are able to kind of triangulate. So we look to see how consistent it is across multiple polls, how it tracks from pre-election to post. Like if we saw a huge jump from pre-election to post-election that doesn't look quite right, like we go, well, wait a minute, we need to kind of get some other data points to kind of suss it out. And I'll just point out one that we actually had that happen in the official national election pool exit polls, the ones that CNN and New York Times and all use. They, for the first time ever, reported that Latino Catholics voted majority for Trump at 52%. And like my eyebrows immediately went up because we've never, ever, ever found Latino Catholics that supportive of a Republican candidate, let alone Trump. And so I knew, okay, something's got to be a little bit wonky. I don't think it was because they weren't telling the truth. I think in this case, it's probably a sampling issue and probably maybe a language issue. So sure enough, when we got some post-election data back, the post-election data that we had looked more in line with the pre-election data and some other, and actually the AP VoteCast exit poll also didn't show it that high. So we think it's more like 4 and 10 rather than 52% voting for Trump. And so I think that's just one example of kind of triangulating, but we've also taken the human interviewer out of the thing, which when you're asking about sensitive things and personal things, race, racism, vote, church attendance, people tend to exaggerate when there's a human interviewer involved, but less so when there's not.
I'll take this next question, and then Diana, there's one coming to you. This one comes from Michelle. Who are the Christian voices, prophets we should be following and sharing within our circle of friends? I'm just going to answer generally, and then if anybody else wants to weigh in with specific names, please do so. But as this PRRI latest data shows us, we should be learning from the political theology of the Black Christian tradition. It is almost the mirror opposite of white evangelicals. And as Robbie said, when you've got a church that's been on the wrong side of slavery and segregation and all kinds of justice issues, particularly pertaining to race, but also politics, maybe you should look outside that tradition for more information. And so much of my work, especially in the spirit of justice, is around that. And again, I'll get on my rant about the information age. This is not hard to find information about how Black Christians are thinking through politics. Yes, follow people. Also look at history. I mean, here's a simple thing, two simple things. One, you can listen to amazing, excellent Black preachers without even leaving your home. There's this thing called YouTube, and you can log on and see live services across the country on Sunday and recordings all day, every day. So if you're apprehensive about, should I go to a Black church? Will I disrupt? How will I? You don't even have to start by physically going. You can just tune in online. Who do you listen to? I've got personal folks I listen to. Tyler Burns at Rise City Church in Pensacola, Micah Edmondson at Koinonia Church in Nashville, Charlie Dates at Progressive Baptist Church, and there's scores of others, of course. Number two, the second thing you can do is I don't know. It's simple, but listen to the Black Christian tradition, and then just any other voices, Christian voices, prophets. Anybody else want to weigh in real quick? Just say the name.
I already mentioned in the chat, Malcolm Foley has a new book coming out. I think it's this February, The Anti-Greed Gospel. I got a sneak peek. It's a really powerful book. And Foley is a historian whose research has focused on lynching in early 20th century and resistance to lynching within the Black church. And it is just a powerful critique of white Christianity. And I mean, if you want to talk to Bible believing Christians, if you want to talk to those who, claim to uphold the authority of the scripture, let's talk about money, right? There is a lot of pretty straightforward teaching in the Old and New Testament about how Christians are supposed to act towards wealth, right? Let's get out the biblical literalism here. And yet we haven't. And that really is the story of 20th century American Christianity with some really devastating effects.
I'd say follow Reggie Williams on social media. Reggie wrote a book called Bonhoeffer's Black Jesus. He hasn't written a full-length book manuscript in a while, although he is working on a project about the Harlem Renaissance. But you can learn so much from him on both Facebook and Blue Sky. I don't know where else he is now. He was on X. I think he's transferred mostly over to Blue Sky. He is fantastic. And he has a very evangelical background. His PhD is from Fuller Seminary. And yet his theological vision has just exploded. And he's one of the best, I think, theologians in the Black tradition working today. He teaches at St. Louis University. Also, I just love from the mainline perspective. I mean, no, but Otis Moss cannot be beat as a preacher in the more liberal mainline space. And he as well. Follow him on social media, watch services from Trinity Church and Trinity UCC in Chicago. Fantastic stuff.
Oh, I was going to mention Otis Moss, and I also threw in Jackie Lewis at Middle Collegiate Church in New York. Also, Kelly Brown Douglas, who doesn't have a regular pulpit, but she is canon theologian at the Washington National Cathedral as well, an Episcopal, ordained Episcopal priest as well.
She has some great books, and also in that same category, Will Gaffney, who teaches at Bright, has an entire lectionary focused around womanist perspectives on scripture itself. Will Gaffney.
We'll just take one or two more. This one is sort of inside the DC Beltway question, Diana, from Kent. I read today that Mike Johnson may be in trouble trying to continue as speaker next year. Republicans like Green want Musk, of all people, to be speaker. Thoughts on that?
Well, I think that Mike Johnson has been in trouble since day one, just because of the conflicts within the Republican very small majority. And it's going to be interesting, that Musk decided to pressure him at this point and bring him to heel. Because it does show that there is that little bit of distance, I think, between what we were talking about earlier. Mike Johnson is really the full-on Christian nationalist guy, and Elon Musk, who has a different kind of agenda. So this could show some of those fraying threads, and how Mike Johnson survives it, and how he might continue to retain some independence from Musk could be a kind of a predictor for some of the future of this really interesting coalition that's developed between these very different groups under the authoritarian banner.
And I should just say, in theory, there's no constitutional provision that requires the Speaker of the House to be from the House of Representatives. So they could, in theory, elect pretty much anybody. That's never happened before, but it could.
I kind of count that one as a DC kind of rumorish possibility. Although, hey, Musk bought himself a country, so why not a speakership? But there was a lot of chatter all along the Biden presidency to make Trump the Speaker of the House and put him in line for third in presidency. And so these kinds of things float around DC all the time. And most of them are just like wishful thinking or interesting articles that wind up in some back page in the Post.
We are living in unprecedented times, so we shouldn't be surprised at anything that may come our way. This is the last question. This will be sort of a round robin from Lori. Jemar's newsletter talked about practicing courage. Would love to hear everyone's suggestions of small steps we can all do. And I'll just sort of expand that question out. This is our last Convocation Unscripted live before the new year. So in between now and, say, the inauguration, what are some habits we can cultivate either for sort of survival or self-care, or for courage? I mean, what would you just encourage folks to do?
One of the things that I'm actually doing that will be on inauguration weekend itself is my friend Brian McLaren and I host a conference in St. Simon's Island in Georgia. And it's available as a virtual event, as well as people who want to come. It's called Southern Lights. And Robbie is one of our main speakers this year, and our theme is faith and democracy. Jackie Lewis is one of our speakers, as well as Dante Stewart. So we're going to spend the weekend right before Trump's inauguration drinking in the company of incredibly intelligent, well-educated, interesting people who have deep passion about the future of democracy. So I'd just like to invite people to come along virtually on that. And other than that, I'm sinking into simple things like the Christmas story itself. This week is the Magnificat story, where the mighty are cast down from their thrones and the poor are lifted up. And so I am celebrating Mary, the mother of Jesus, this weekend with full abandon. And I encourage all of my Baptist friends to do likewise, because she is the first ever prophet of Christianity, the mother of Jesus. And boy, she'd give it to Elon Musk.
I'll take the Babs cue and jump in. I would say, like, I think a couple of things. We do have to kind of speak up. I think I put Jennifer Harvey's book in the chat, who's like one of the, I think, better people writing about what white people can do in white spaces, especially in white churches, predominantly white churches, and just the kind of, importance of speaking up and not being silent. And there's some strategic ways to do that where you don't have to blow up every conversation, right? It doesn't have to be that kind of thing, right? It can be, you pick your moments, you pick your people, right? But the important thing is just not to be silent so that there's a assumed consensus in the room to kind of, there's a kind of, people are on notice that there's a variety. Just the fact that people are on notice that there's other opinions in the room in predominantly white spaces is itself something different often. So kind of just making sure you're the person that kind of makes that happen. Doesn't have to be over the kind of Christmas turkey or ham, right? That's maybe not the best place for it, but other spaces, other times. But and then I think just ready for the long game. There's going to be so much coming at us. I'm thinking a lot about January 20th, and that's going to be kind of overwhelming, but it really is a long game that we're talking about here and trying to find the places where each of us has our spheres of influence. And I'm going to recommend one more book. It's Eddie Glaude's We Are the Leaders We've Been Looking For. It's the W.B. Du Bois lectures that he gave a few years ago. He's a fellow Mississippian, teaches religion at Princeton. It's Eddie Glaude Jr., We Are the Leaders We've Been Looking For. That's about much in the vein of Jemar's book, The Spirit of Justice, how ordinary people, right, can do some extraordinary things when they are committed to doing it.
Yeah, I'll go old school and suggest sounds kind of dull, but book clubs, which is, community education. It's empowering, and we're talking about borrowing courage from each other. But rather than just kind of going back to your regular friend group, um, I would suggest it takes a little courage to just put out on social media, wherever you are on social media, and say, hey, you could do it remote or ideally in person in your community. Say, I live in, Iowa City, and I want to connect with people around, ideas of what we can do to support democracy and what we have to learn, and then see who responds. And what that's going to do is build new relationships, new connections, and that's really what we need to do. There are a lot of people who are doing good work, a lot of people who feel really isolated, and there are networks that we need to bring together. And so I would say, we have all kinds of book suggestions just thrown out today. We can come up with more. We can recommend books all day long. Maybe one to start with is Jamar's Spirit of Justice. That would be a really great one. Another like really easy one to get things off and running is Snyder's On Tyranny, right? You can literally read it in a half an hour. So that's maybe a good entry level, because sometimes people who aren't readers don't think they can join a book club. Maybe a multimedia kind of group, conversation groups. But again, I urge you, if you think about doing something like this, be creative and open it up so you meet new people this way and connect with folks in your community, and then see what grows out of that. Maybe we need to do like an Oprah book club, or
Throw that in the chat.
right,
Kristin.
right, yeah, a Reese Witherspoon. Like, they've got something really big going on, or Jen Hatmaker. Maybe that's what we need here. We need to have like
Good
a
call.
communal, like,
A
yes, we're all in this.
Convocation book club.
Yes. Okay, we need to work on this, guys.
So we just need, the funds just to do this full time, and we could build this thing out, no problem.
Okay. Oh yeah, we
Um,
need funders. Funders. There you go.
That's a
I'm
great
just gonna
idea,
get
though. Book club.
I can go off on a whole soapbox on why book clubs are so important, and they're more important than we give credit for, because we always say beyond the book club, but actually you're building awareness, relationships, and a commitment to policy and substantive and institutional change. But that's a
You
topic
wrote a
for
book
another
on it,
time.
didn't you, Jamar?
I did. I'll just get super practical. Take the PRRI data. I just posted it in the chat. Find one of the slides, one of the data points that really evokes an emotional response from you and share it. For some of you, that's going to be really scary because you know who's going to see it and who may comment. That's your little act of courage. And guess what? There are people who are in much more acute circumstances where they're going to get a lot worse than a nasty or oppositional comment online. Not to minimize how hard it is, but to also put it in perspective, right? And if that's not a stretch for you, if you've been doing that, well, then what's the next step? And I just give the PRRI data as some piece of content you can work with that people are likely to have different opinions about. But it could be anything. Any of the books we mentioned, take a quote, take a data point, whatever. Put it out there, start a discussion, and hold your position. I won't say stand your ground. That has other connotations. So yeah, there you go. Y'all, this has been so good. Let me just tell you from the Convocation unscripted perspective, we get energy and encouragement from you all. And the reason why we did multiple of these lives is so we could interact with you. So thank you so much for joining us. Please share. I'll bet you know people who would love this conversation. Share these articles with them, share these resources, and let them know. If you subscribe to convocation.substack.com, you will be the first to know the next time we do this. So here's your other challenge. Bring a friend next time. Between now and the next one we host, which I don't think we've set a date, bring somebody and let's encourage each other, especially because, y'all, this is just the amuse-bouche of the next regime. January 20th is coming. So we gonna need each other. All right. Okay, let me do this formal outro and we will let y'all do what you do. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Convocation Unscripted. We encourage you to subscribe to our biweekly newsletter at convocation.substack.com and our individual Substacks. We will see you soon at the next Convocation.